Welcome to the McKinney-Vento Tiered Monitoring Webinar. My name is Cheryl Kuzmaka, and I am the State Coordinator for the McKinney-Vento Education of Homeless Children and Youth Program at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. This webinar is one of the required trainings for all LEA homeless liaisons in the state. Let's get started. Subtitle 7B of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which was reauthorized in 2015 by Title IX, Part A of the Every Student Succeeds Act, guarantees educational rights and support for students experiencing homelessness. We're going to look at the tiered monitoring timeline that all districts will go through depending on their cohort cycle. You'll see from the chart that a desk audit is something that is done on a regular basis for all districts, whether you're in cohort 1, 2, or 3. When concerns are brought to my attention about compliance from parents, guardians, or unaccompanied homeless youth, concerns that arise between districts, it is an opportunity during the desk audit to provide technical assistance to LEAs to support the needs of homeless children and youth. All LEAs are required to complete a tiered monitoring desk monitoring every 3 years. The 3-year model is based on cohorts. Cohort 3 will complete the McKinney-Vento section in the October cycle of tiered monitoring in school year 2022-2023. The questions you will see on the upcoming slides are copies of the checklist that is in the tiered monitoring system for the McKinney-Vento program. Even if your district is not in cohort 3 and required to upload documentation in the upcoming year, you should use the checklist on a regular basis as your guide to meet compliance for the implementation of the McKinney-Vento Act. That includes districts that identify homeless students and those who do not. I have included a link to the cohort list and the tiered monitoring checklist. Okay, getting started. The LEA homeless liaison should be the person that is providing the necessary documentation to upload into the tiered monitoring system. Most slides contain a section of the homeless non-regulatory guidance that supports the STEM statement for each of these items in the tiered monitoring checklist. Please use this guidance. Again, the LEA's board adopted homeless liaison should be providing all the necessary documentation to support the questions for the McKinney-Vento review. There may be someone else at your district that does the actual uploads into the tiered monitoring system, but it is very important that the McKinney-Vento liaison understands the requirements of the program. Okay, we're going to look at the very first question that you will see in the McKinney-Vento October cycle of tiered monitoring. This question is asking the evidence that you survey your student body and each year. So the question will ask for evidence of the required questions on the student enrollment registration form or required questions on an alternative student survey. So what I would be looking for this question would be evidence that your LEA is serving all families annually during the enrollment and registration process to identify homeless children and youth. Documentation that your LEA is using the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness for identification. I have included a link to a sample enrollment form from the DESE website. All LEAs are required to have policies in place for the identification of homeless children and youth. One way to ensure that all students experiencing homelessness are identified is to survey all families at least once a year using the definition of homelessness. Just uploading a policy is not acceptable for this item. Copies of the enrollment form with the qualifying questions must be uploaded. The second question is evidence that your district is using an identification process and training all school personnel and community partners such as churches, shelters, libraries, food kitchens. So evidence that the identification process of homeless children and youth is coordinated with community and all school personnel would include separate items. This is a two-part question. Both of these items are required for both your community and the communication with all school personnel. I would want to see materials used to train all school personnel and materials used to train community partners, documentation of who received this training at the LEA, and documentation of who received this information in the community. Another way to ensure that all students experiencing homelessness are identified is ongoing outreach and training of all school personnel, interagencies, and community partners. Places in the community that homeless families and youth may visit, like churches, libraries, food kitchens, local gas stations, etc., are great resources in the effort to locate and serve all the children and youth experiencing homelessness in your area. I know that districts are communicating on a regular basis with our, maybe your children's division or your juvenile justice system, who usually are well positioned to identify homeless children anyway. So it's really those organizations in your local community that homeless students or families frequent often that you would want to provide information. And an easy way to provide that information and to help with the identification process is to, it's acceptable to attach information, for example, Educating Missouri's Homeless Children and Youth poster or brochure to an email that contains introduction and contact information for the homeless liaison. Again, information about the identification process of homeless children and youth must be disseminated to all school personnel and community agencies. Samples of the poster and brochure, as well as the sample community contact letter, is listed on the resource slide later in this PowerPoint. Okay, the next question is verification of board policy, that you have a board adopted policy and procedure that ensures that there are no barriers to the enrollment, attendance, and success of homeless children and youth. Evidence would be a copy of the LEA's most current policy and proof of board adoption. Common policies that are used are the Missouri School Board Association, IGBCA, the Missouri Consultant for Education, and it's Regulation 2260. Policy 2260 is not all inclusive of what is required for this item. Regulation 2260 of Missouri Consultant for Education company that provides some of these policies to our districts. We're looking for Regulation 2260. There's also the EGS 1 I-140P. It's important to make sure that that particular policy has the correct definition of homelessness. So the McKinney-Vento Act includes a broad ongoing requirement for LEAs to review policies or practices that may act as barriers to the identification, enrollment, attendance, and school success of homeless children and youth. As a state, we have required this policy to be adopted. The policy that is uploaded must include all of the components mentioned in the STEM statement. Part of those policies or a requirement of the McKinney-Vento Act is that the LEA has identified a board-appointed district homeless liaison. A couple of those policies that were mentioned in the previous slide include the option to identify that liaison's position or name. So I am looking for evidence that your LEA's homeless liaison has been appointed by the board. That could include either minutes or board adopted policy confirming the appointment of the LEA homeless liaison. The appointment must come from the board, and evidence of that appointment should be uploaded. Okay, we're looking at what are the homeless liaison's responsibilities. The homeless liaison serves as one of the primary contacts between homeless families and school staff, district personnel, shelter workers, and other service providers. The homeless liaison must be aware of the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness and all of the responsibilities and duties that are required in the law. This information must be disseminated to all school personnel. Attaching the Educating Missouri Homeless Children brochure to an email to all school personnel is an acceptable way to disseminate this information. Included in that brochure are the required responsibilities of the homeless liaison, as well as the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. Homeless liaison training. All LEA homeless liaisons must complete required training provided by the state McKinney-Vento coordinator annually, even if it is not your LEA's cohort year for tiered monitoring. So evidence that the liaison has completed that training. Example of one of the required trainings, as I mentioned earlier, would be this training, the tiered monitoring process. Evidence would be the certificate of completion for required trainings. I have included a link to the page where you can find the required trainings. The dispute resolution policy. LEAs must have a homeless dispute resolution policy that is board approved. If your LEA has initiated a dispute resolution, documentation must be uploaded that supports a written explanation to the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth of the decision of the LEA, verification that the LEA dispute resolution process policy was provided to the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied homeless youth, and verification that the student was enrolled in the desired district and provided transportation for the duration of the dispute. The other required training for the 2022-23 school year is the McKinney-Vento dispute resolution policy, and it is recorded and posted on the DESE website. The dispute resolution policy is included in Missouri School Board Association IGBCA policy. as well as the Missouri Consultant for Education Regulation 2260 policy, the dispute resolution. So if you have that policy that you have uploaded for the previous item, you would want to upload that same policy, and it would include that dispute resolution policy. Okay, the next item I'm going to spend a little bit of time on because I find that this is probably one of the more items that are not really understood fully. So this is asking for comparable Title I services. So I want to see that the LEA provides comparable Title I services to homeless students attending non-Title I schools. LEAs must reserve sufficient Title I funds on their ESEA consolidated budget applications, provide services to homeless students who attend non-Title I schools. These services should be comparable to those provided to homeless students in Title I schools. Using the Title IA set-aside funds to provide supplemental instruction services to those homeless students attending non-Title I funded schools is an allowable use. Services that are not ordinarily provided to homeless students in Title IA schools are also allowable. For example, graduation fees, dual credit classes, supplies for an extracurricular activity, etc. In addition to serving homeless children and youth who attend non-Title I schools, the homeless set-aside may be used to provide services to homeless students in Title I schools that are not ordinarily provided to other Title I students. The most common response I receive for this item is from districts that have K-12 students and say that their entire district is served with Title IA funds, that they are school-wide. I understand that you have grade spans that are Title IA school-wide. There are only a few districts in the state that use Title IA funds to serve every grade span and every building in their district. So, for example, if you are a K-12 building and you use your Title IA funds to serve your K-6 students, those homeless students that are in grades 7 through 12 would need to be provided comparable Title I services using the set-aside on your ESEA consolidated budget application. You may also use funds to support those homeless students in those non-Title I served buildings with district funds, or maybe you have a fund, a set of funds that were donated. It's okay to do that, but I would just need to see, for example, receipts or purchase orders for items that were purchased for those students that are not served in Title IA buildings. Another example of possible services or items that you would provide, if you offer a shop class, for example, and parents are required to purchase protective glasses or a certain item that's required for that class, you may use that Title IA set aside for those homeless students that are participating in that program. This particular item is not applicable if your LEA reports 0 homeless students. Evidence of immediate enrollment. The LEA ensures that homeless students are immediately enrolled in the school of choice and assisted with basic school requirements. So I would be looking for evidence of documentation from the LEAs student information system, and attendance records showing the date enrolled and date attended. The LEA has an ongoing obligation to remove barriers to the enrollment and retention of homeless children and youth. A school selected on the basis of a best interest determination must immediately enroll the homeless child or youth, even if the child or youth is unable to produce the records normally required for enrollment, such as previous academic records, records of immunization, and other required health records, proof of residency, proof of guardianship, birth certificate, or other documentation. If the family or youth has missed application or enrollment deadlines during a period of homelessness or has outstanding fees. The enrolling school must also immediately contact the school last attended by the child or youth to obtain relevant academic or other records. In addition, an LEA should ensure that homeless students attending classes and participating fully in school activities immediately upon the student being identified as eligible for McKinney-Vento rights and services. The tiered monitoring system is password protected, but you may redact names if you would like. The next item talks about unaccompanied youth. So the LEA should identify unaccompanied youth and ensure that they are enrolled in school, identifies and removes barriers that prevent homeless youth from receiving appropriate credit for full or partial coursework satisfactorily completed while attending a prior school, and informs unaccompanied youth of their status as independent student and assists the unaccompanied homeless youth with applying for college, completing the FAFSA, and verifying their status as independent student. So evidence for this long STEM statement. This long statement is enrollment records of unaccompanied homeless youth, including date of enrollment and first day of attendance. A process for awarding credits for students who transfer into your district. This would be any student, housed or not, but in this particular item, we're looking for evidence of a homeless student that transferred into your district. How do you determine the award of credits? The process to determine independent status for purpose of filling out the FAFSA. So how do you know? How do you know whether or not that student meets the independent status? You would also need verification, evidence of verification that a student was an unaccompanied homeless youth during the time they were enrolled at your district. So you would need to have a verification letter on file that you would include with your FAFSA application to expedite that process. I'd also want to see a completed individual career and academic plan for the unaccompanied homeless youth. That's something that you would be doing with all your high school students. Every student is required to have an individual career and academic plan. I would just want to see that for a, if you do not have unaccompanied homeless youth student currently, I would still need to see this documentation to verify that you would know what to do if an unaccompanied homeless youth did enroll in your district and needed to be needed assistance with these items. A school selection. The LEA ensures enrollment in the school of origin when determined to be in the best interest of the child. So I am looking for evidence and documentation that supports decisions of school selection when a homeless child or youth is not attending their school of origin. Also, documentation that supports notification to parents and youth who of their right to dispute school selection. This information or process is required by all LEAs, even if 0 homeless students are reported. McKinney-Vento supports that students remain in their school of origin to promote school stability and greater educational outcomes overall. LEAs must presume that keeping the homeless child or youth in the school of origin is in the child or youth's best interest, except with doing so is contrary to the request of the child or youth's parent or guardian, or in the case of an unaccompanied youth, the youth. If a parent decides to enroll in the school of residence instead of remaining in the school of origin, this decision must be documented. If the LEA believes that it is in the child's best interest to no longer attend the school of origin and enroll in the child's residence school, best interest determinations must consider student-centered factors. A school selection checklist is a way to document decisions made by the LEA. The LEA must provide the child or youth's parent or guardian or unaccompanied youth with a written explanation of the reasons for its determination in a manner and form understandable to such parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth. This written explanation must also include information regarding the right to appeal. This school selection is talked about in detail in the McKinney-Vento dispute resolution process webinar that is recorded in a required training. So if you have a student that is enrolling and they must be made aware that they can return to their school of origin. And there should be documentation if they are not attending their school of origin and they are attending the school of residence. I would want to see documentation of how that decision was made, how the decision was made for that student to attend their school of residency rather than attend their school of origin. That can be case notes that maybe a parent says, I would like to enroll my student here where we're living. We don't have any plans to return to the previous school, or it may be a more detailed checklist based on student-centered factors of how that determination was made. That every student who transfers into your district and is not attending their school of origin there must be documentation to support those decisions. Transportation agreements. Okay, the LEA ensures transportation to the school of origin. Transportation agreements are very important. Evidence that ensures transportation to the school of origin is documentation that supports the date transportation was requested and the date the transportation began. Transportation agreements can look different depending on what that transportation is. Maybe the transportation to the school of origin is being provided as a mileage reimbursement to the family. So that transportation agreement would look different than a transportation agreement maybe with a service by a contracted provider, like a cab company. If you're in a transportation agreement with a family that you're reimbursing mileage, you would want to make sure that you are checking that person's insurance and the proof of license. Also, that everyone understood exactly what that mileage amount would be, what the mileage would include, which would be to and from. And actually, it should be, the law says to and from the school of origin. If it is a barrier for that parent to take the child to school, return back home, and return back to school in the afternoon and So 2 round trips, if it's a barrier for them to do that uh, round trip twice, then you should be providing reimbursement for the full round trip distance. Then there's also transportation agreements between LEA of origin and the LEA of residence. I often get calls that districts are unaware that they even are providing transportation or sharing the transportation of a student. When a student lives in one district and attends a school in the other, both districts are required to share the cost of that transportation. And both districts should be aware and agree to the parameters of that agreement, what that looks like. And this documentation is required by all LEAs, even if 0 homeless students are reported. You should have this information in your file in case you do have a homeless student enroll and you need to get that transportation started right away. So you should have those agreements ready to go in a file at your district. Okay, the next item is equal opportunity. Homeless children and youth are enrolled in and have a full and equal opportunity to succeed in schools of that local education agency. So basically, the purpose of this item is that we want to see that documentation that supports homeless students are also having the option to participate in clubs and athletics and special programs. So LEAs must have procedures to ensure that homeless children and youth who meet the relevant eligibility criteria do not face barriers to assessing academic and extracurricular activities, including dual credit, summer school, career and technical education, advanced placement, online learning, etc. If such programs are available at the local levels. Uploading a policy is not acceptable for this item. Evidence could include rosters, transcripts from student information systems showing participation in special programs. I have seen evidence where district student information system will say that a student has an IEP or that they do get Title I-A services. Those actually are common. I mean, students are not going to be turned away from those services. So I really like to see evidence of participation of other type clubs and special programs. This would not be applicable if you report 0 homeless students. Okay, I mentioned earlier they have lots of resources and links that you are welcome to use to complete the tiered monitoring process. The sample enrollment form I mentioned in the beginning as part of the identification process, something that you could use on your enrollment form. The homeless poster it's simple. I think it's a great resource to attach to an email to your community partners and your local community agencies to introduce yourself. And there's a place on the poster to put contact information. These posters should also be disseminated throughout your LEA. They should be in all buildings. It's required by law to have these posters disseminated in your buildings. And Educating Missouri's Homeless Children brochure, it goes into a little bit more detail about McKinney-Vento rights and services. I think that this is a great resource to attach to an email to all school personnel about the identification process of homeless children and youth. It includes the responsibilities of the homeless liaison. It includes the definition of homelessness according to the McKinney-Vento Act. I've also included a sample communication letter. There's information about comparable Title I-A services to students attending non-Title I-A schools. I have a FAFSA checklist here for you. A FAFSA checklist to determine independent status. Actually, the checklist will help determine independent status. The FAFSA verification letter is one that would be attached to the FAFSA application if the student is applying as an independent. There's some good information about partial credit. I've got a sample of the ICAP, the individual career and academic plan, the school selection checklist, and a little bit of information about what that looks like. There's an inter-district transportation agreement, and then a link to the required trainings. On these forms, if your LEA reports homeless students and you are using one of these documents as an evidence source for a required item, the form must be completed for a homeless student. Do not upload a blank form. The only districts that I would see a blank form for would be one that does not identify homeless students at this time. Some of those items might be blank if it does not apply to them. But if you are reporting homeless students, I want to see a sample of the school selection checklist. What did that look like? What did that look like when you were determining school selection with one of your homeless students? Okay, this training, as I mentioned, is being recorded and will be posted to the DESE website. You will have the option here at this link to obtain a certificate of completion. When you click on this link, it will bring you to a short form to complete. That form is just asking for a name, an LEA liaison name, or the person who is reviewing the training, the LEA name, and an email. And once that form is complete and submitted, you will receive an email with a link to the certificate. You would want to print and save that certificate as verification of participation. If you are in cohort 3, I would look for the 2 required trainings that are posted on our website during the tiered monitoring process. If it is not your tiered monitoring year, you would just want to keep those certificates in a file so that they would be available if I needed to request those from you. And here on the screen on the slide is my contact information. Please do not hesitate to contact me anytime. Thank you again for joining today, and thank you for all you do to support our McKinney-Vento students.